The film begins in 1818, when the system of slavery started to be used by a handful of people for their own gain. Now, in a certain location in the United States, a boy named Abraham Lincoln tries to defend his friend William, who is being beaten up by several henchmen of a plantation owner named Bart. Realizing his son was in danger, Abraham's father, Thomas, immediately came to his aid, leading to a fight between them. After the incident, Thomas and his wife Nancy were fired by Bart, the plantation owner. At the same time, Bart also demanded that Thomas pay off all his debts. That night, just as Abraham was about to go to sleep, he was suddenly awakened when he heard the door to his house open, where he saw Bart enter the room and approach his mother. No one knows exactly what Bart did, but the next morning, Nancy was clearly in tremendous pain. A doctor was then called to examine her condition, but even so, Nancy's life could not be saved. After his mother passed away, Abraham, still grieving, tried to explain to his father what he had seen when his mother was attacked. However, even after being told, his father didn't really believe him and instead asked Abraham to promise not to do anything foolish. 9 years later, Abraham's father had passed away. Now, Abraham, who had grown up, was sitting in a bar reflecting on his unresolved grudge over his mother's death. Inside the bar, he happened to meet a man named Henry who tried to strike up a conversation with him. But unfortunately, since Abraham didn't have time to chat, he ended up leaving Henry behind. It turned out Abraham went to the plantation to keep an eye on Bart's movements. Here, Abraham saw Bart talking to his superior, Adam, about the harvest and also about someone named Henry. Right after Adam left, Abraham appeared from under the dock and pointed his gun. But unfortunately, the gun Abraham was about to use suddenly jammed after being submerged in water earlier. From there, Bart tried to chase Abraham while mocking him about his mother's death. Inside a room, Abraham then tried to fix and reload his gun, and after he finished, thinking that Bart was already dead, Abraham threw away his pistol, but not long after, Abraham was attacked again by Bart, who had now turned into a vampire. Fortunately, the mysterious man named Henry appeared and saved Abraham. The next morning, Abraham, who had fainted, woke up in Henry's house. Upon meeting, Henry introduced himself and at the same time scolded Abraham for his foolish act of trying to attack a vampire without any preparation. Henry then revealed that he was a vampire hunter. Abraham initially doubted the story about vampires, but after learning that Bart could come back to life after being shot in the head, he finally believed it. Henry explained that vampires are indeed real and that many of them are even very active within the government. From there, Henry intended to teach Abraham how to kill vampires, but with one condition: Abraham must not use that ability for revenge. Because if that was his goal, then everything he learned would be in vain. Before starting training, Henry then took Abraham to his weapons warehouse to let Abraham choose any weapon he wanted. But instead of choosing a rifle, Abraham was actually more interested in an axe as his main weapon. From there, Henry then took Abraham to the forest and asked him to chop down a tree with a single swing. Hearing that, Abraham looked confused and doubtful. However, when Henry told him to imagine the thing he hated most, Abraham then started picturing Jack Burt as the person he despised the most. At first, Abraham's swing seemed very weak, but after swinging several times while remembering his mother's death,
lived in fear. Yes, to protect her. Too weak.
the next crucial lesson is fighting effectively in the dark. This particular skill becomes incredibly important and highly valuable because some types of vampires are widely known to possess the supernatural ability to become completely invisible to the naked eye. In short, after spending quite some time there, Abraham now has enough skills to hunt vampires. After that, Henry coated the blade of Abraham's axe with silver. Henry explained that silver is the weakness of vampires and that it can also be used to identify them. Here, Henry then explained that their target was to eliminate the two strongest vampires, named Vedoma and her brother Adam, who is Bart's superior. Adam and Vedoma are the ones responsible for the creation of all the vampires roaming across the country. So, when slaves from Europe were brought to America, Adam and Vedoma saw that as an opportunity to create a kingdom in the southern part of America, where they then allied themselves with the slave owners to increase their numbers. Because of that, the role of people like Henry or other hunters is to ensure that this world remains in the hands of humans. A few years later, Abraham had parted ways with Henry and began his adventure as a hunter in the city of Springfield. Upon arriving, Abraham then tried to find a place to stay. However, since he didn't have enough money, he ended up accepting an offer from a shop owner named Speed, who offered Abraham a job in exchange for lodging at his place. One day, while Abraham was working at the shop, he met and was also captivated by a young woman named Mary. Mary came with her fiancé, Stephen, who was one of the prospective officials. In the middle of their conversation, Abraham then received a letter from Henry informing him about the possibility of a vampire working at a pharmacy in the city center. Upon learning this, Abraham, who had finished his work, quickly gathered all his equipment and set out to hunt the vampire. During the fight, Abraham fell into a trap where he was now hanging upside down along with people whose blood had been drained. Fortunately, Abraham quickly managed to free himself and then killed the vampire.
Did you eat today?
The next day, Speed planned to invite Abraham to a party where Speed wanted to give Abraham a chance to get closer to Mary. Thanks to Speed's help, Abraham finally had the opportunity to dance with Mary, which made Mary's fiancé Stephen jealous. Sometime later, Abraham received another letter from Henry regarding a vampire who was working at a local bar. When he confronted the vampire, Abraham was initially overwhelmed, as it turned out the vampire had the ability to become invisible. However, armed with a handful of rice, Abraham eventually managed to defeat the creature. For some time, Abraham kept receiving missions to eliminate vampires, and he was surprised to discover just how many vampires were around him. He was so busy hunting vampires that it started to disrupt his life, even interfering when he was on a date with Mary. One day, Abraham decided to reveal all his secrets to Mary, explaining that he had been working as a vampire hunter all this time. Of course, Mary didn't believe him. But even though Mary didn't believe him, for Abraham, it was important to tell her because it served as a reminder of how dangerous it was to be a hunter, which also meant he had to keep his distance from Mary. In the midst of their relationship, without them realizing it, Bar was actually watching Mary under Adam's orders, who had grown suspicious about the deaths of several of his vampire followers. Meanwhile, while Abraham was on duty at the shop, a customer arrived who turned out to be his childhood friend, William. William had gotten into trouble after he freed several slaves in the South. As a result, he ended up being hunted by several bounty hunters. That's why he needed Abraham's help as his lawyer, because as far as William knew, Abraham was very knowledgeable about the law. So he hoped that Abraham would be willing to write a legal statement declaring that he was free from slavery. From there, the two of them then relaxed outside. But they hadn't been talking for long when suddenly the bounty hunters appeared and attacked William.
You walk away, son.
As a result of the incident, Abraham and William were then thrown into prison. Mary, who came to see them, said that Abraham and William would soon be released thanks to the influence of her senator acquaintances. From this point, Abraham began to think that he couldn't just stand by when it came to the issue of slavery. Because of that, after being freed from prison, Abraham then began his political campaign to address the issue of slavery from a different perspective. Abraham then met with a senator named Nolan, who offered to connect him with someone to smooth his path into politics. After that, Abraham met with Henry, who also came to remind him that they were dealing with the problem of a vampire hunter. Henry also revealed that it seemed Mary was in danger, and he then said that now was the right time for Abraham to take his revenge. A chase ensued in the midst of a crowd of horses that had been deliberately set loose. Abraham was seen struggling for a moment. However, after fighting for some time, he was finally able to take down the figure who had killed his mother. Before he died, Bart revealed that they were indeed targeting Abraham, including Henry as well. But what shocked Abraham was when Bart said that Henry was actually a vampire too. Upon learning the truth, Abraham then searched for Henry and found him feeding on someone in a narrow alley. Realizing Abraham's wild attack, Henry eventually told him everything. Back when Henry was still human, he and his lover were suddenly ambushed by a group of vampires while traveling together. During the incident, Henry managed to defeat some of them, but when he faced Adam, Henry was beaten badly. His lover was even forced to watch as Henry was bitten by Adam, and when it was over, it was Henry's turn to witness Adam drain all the blood from his lover. Henry tried to attack Adam once more, but unfortunately, by the law of nature, it turned out that vampires cannot kill other vampires. So, after learning about Henry's past, Abraham then decided to part ways and leave all his hunting activities behind, as he was no longer a hunter. Abraham then proposed to Mary, and in the following days, the two of them got married. Henry, who found out about it, came to see Abraham to warn him that what Abraham was doing could put Mary in danger. And sure enough, the next day, Adam, who had learned that Abraham was the one who killed Bart, ordered Vedoma to kidnap William. Knowing that his friend had been kidnapped, Abraham then began a rescue mission together with Speed to the New Orleans area. At this moment, Abraham had already told Speed about who he really was, a vampire hunter. Abraham didn't care whether Speed believed him or not, but he did it on purpose because to Abraham, Speed was a true friend. Next, as soon as they arrived, the two of them came to a large house where they witnessed William and the other slaves dancing together with several vampires. The situation suddenly changed when someone ordered the vampires to attack all the slaves. Abraham, realizing what was happening, immediately broke into the house, where a fight broke out between Abraham and the vampires. Unfortunately, in that incident, Vedoma managed to make Abraham fall and trapped him using a chair. Here, Adam then forced Abraham to kill Henry, and if Abraham refused, Adam threatened to kill William right in front of his eyes. However, just as the situation started to spiral out of control, suddenly, Speed burst in using a horse-drawn carriage. After successfully escaping, the three of them then met a woman who had been waiting for them by the river. From there, Abraham, Will, and Speed were taken to the Ohio area, specifically to a church that, as it turned out, had long served as a hiding place for slaves who managed to escape from Adam and his followers. Realizing how horrific the practice of slavery was, Abraham then decided to further his political career in order to abolish the entire system of slavery. Abraham's decision was once again opposed by Henry, who reminded him that slavery was the only thing that kept the vampires satisfied and allowed them to live freely in the South. But if Abraham were to abolish it, it would be the same as bringing destruction to the entire country. Still, Abraham didn't care, because what mattered most to him now was freeing everyone from slavery. That's why, from now on, he put away his axe, and instead, he would fight using his words and his mind. Long story short, after fighting for quite some time, Abraham finally became the first president of the United States. During his leadership, many things happened, including the outbreak of war between the North and the South, which caused significant losses for the North. Years later, Abraham and Mary had a son whom they named William after his best friend. One day, without their knowledge, Vedoma secretly snuck into the White House and gained access to William's room, where he cruelly bit his arm in order to force Abraham to give up his efforts to abolish slavery. Abraham, who found out that his son was ill, was shocked when he saw the mark on William's hand, as the wound was exactly the same as the one that had caused his mother's death in the past. A few days later, as Abraham was accompanying his son in his final moments, Henry suddenly appeared, having learned about what had happened. Henry said that he had previously warned Abraham, but in addition to that, Henry also added that he could bring Abraham's son back to life. However, on one condition, Abraham must make peace with the southern faction led by Adam, so that no more lives would be lost. Unbeknownst to them, their conversation was overheard by Mary, who then pleaded with Abraham to do whatever it took to bring their son back. Mary revealed that she had recently read Abraham's diary, and since then, she finally realized that Abraham was once a vampire hunter. After that conversation, Abraham decided to send his Union troops to the battlefield. The Confederate forces in the southern states then promptly heard the alarming news, and subsequently, they urgently asked Adam to dispatch his formidable vampires to the very front lines of the conflict, which ultimately resulted in the northern troops being completely and utterly destroyed.
Drop their rifle!
The news of the defeat made Abraham even more worried, especially if the rebel forces on the southern side intended to launch a counterattack. At this moment, while Abraham was talking to Mary, he suddenly remembered something. He just realized that vampires were vulnerable to silver. From there, Abraham then asked Speed and William to confiscate all silverware throughout the entire state. However, in this situation, it turned out that Speed betrayed Abraham by leaking the information to Vedoma about Abraham's plan to transport the silver by train. Speed did this on purpose because he believed that everything Abraham had done so far had brought the country to ruin. Meanwhile, realizing that his skills were still needed, Abraham took up his axe, which he had kept stored away for years. Next, the process of transporting the silver by train began. The train was planned to deliver the silver to Gettysburg, which served as the front line in this war. On the other hand, Mary and her servants, who were trying to leave the city of Washington, unexpectedly ran into Adam and his men. Fortunately, because Adam heard the sound of the train, they decided to chase after the train instead of dealing with the president's wife, who was trying to leave the city. In fact, Mary was making the journey under Abraham's orders. Back to the train, where Henry suddenly appears and tries to tell Abraham about Speed, who has betrayed him. In the midst of their argument, the vampires begin to attack and board the train. William is the first to be attacked, but fortunately he manages to defeat several vampires who try to kill him. From there, Abraham then joins the fight, where the two of them once again defeat several vampires by combining their skills. In the midst of this tense situation, Abraham and William then have to face Adam, who knocks Abraham down with a single kick and breaks his axe. William also tries to attack, but once again, Adam nearly knocks him down if Abraham hadn't caught him. While trying to save William, Adam then starts mocking Abraham by saying that he will soon take over this country. Adam then quickly takes advantage of this opportunity to bite Abraham. But unfortunately, what he bites is not Abraham's neck, but Henry's arm, who comes to save Abraham. During the fight, they accidentally broke open one of the chests, and it turned out that the chests below did not contain silver, but rather rocks. Here, Adam finally realized that he had been deceived by Speed and that all of this was actually part of Abraham's plan to gather the vampires in one location. Speed had to die after Adam, feeling betrayed, bit him. Suddenly, the train they were riding started to go off the tracks as it crossed the bridge that had previously been set on fire by Vedoma. Abraham and William, who were on the train, then struggled desperately to keep their balance. At this moment, the enraged Adam approached Abraham again, demanding to know where he had hidden his silver. However, just as Adam began to attack and suddenly disappeared, Abraham quickly tied his silver pocket watch to his wrist and then...
Right here!
In that incident, Abraham and William managed to survive after Henry, who was still alive, came to their rescue by holding back the train that was about to fall off the bridge. The next day, it was discovered that all the silver that had been collected was taken by Mary and all her servants to the headquarters of the troops on the front lines. Then, in the middle of distributing the silver, Mary suddenly spotted Vedoma, who was hiding nearby. And there, Mary then took a weapon and loaded it with the silver necklace that had belonged to her late daughter. Thanks to the silver that was used, the Northern Army managed to win the war against the vampires. Next, 2 years later, Henry told Abraham that the remaining vampires had now fled from America. Because of that, Henry then tried to convince Abraham to become a vampire so that he could become immortal and continue fighting against vampires forever. However, even so, Abraham apparently refused the request, arguing that becoming a vampire was not the only way to achieve immortality, because everything he had done would be remembered by history, and that felt more eternal than anything else in this world. At the end of the film, set in modern times, Henry, who still looks young, is now seen approaching a man at a bar in Washington, D.C. It turns out Henry is still recruiting people, aiming to make them hunters, just as he once did with Abraham. And that was the storyline of the film Abraham Lincoln, Vampire Hunter, which was released in 2012. Hope you all enjoyed it. So thank you to everyone who watched, and see you again next time. You're all awesome. Ciao.